Well, thanks again for joining us. The Social Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP, has urged President Muhammadu Buhari to investigate the spending on all social safety nets and poverty alleviation programs and projects executed between 2015 and 2022.
SERAP, in a letter dated 19th November 2022 and signed by its Deputy Director, Kolawole Oluwadare, urges the President to ensure the findings of any such investigation are widely published and suspected perpetrators of corruption and mismanagement of public funds meant to take care of the poor should face prosecution as appropriate if there is sufficient evidence, and any stolen public funds should be recovered.
A recent report by the National Bureau of Statistics, the NBS, reveals that 133 million Nigerians are poor, despite the government reportedly spending 500 billion naira yearly on social investment programs.
Okay, let's join a RISE analyst, Associate Professor of Law, Sam Amadi, to look at this worrisome development. Does it need to really take SERAP, to trigger this conversation when the NBS, for the last 7 years, the situation of unemployment, poverty has been deepening and deepening and deepening, and now it's getting to a crescendo that in some country could have led to certain political explosions, if you like.
Well, I think SERAP's focus is on accountability, of financial accountability. So the question is, government has appropriated so much money, the humanitarian ministry has supervised and claimed to have disbursed so much trader money. Now, we've said, and I've said I consider those policies are not capable of impacting. First, they are subject to corruption by virtue of a very unaccountable lack of transparency in the administration. So this is a government third world country that's still rated as one of the poorest. Now, when you do cash transfers, you create opportunity for large-scale pervasive corruption. I mean, we have anecdotal evidence of staff who work in those ministries who say, look, when we go to the states, the state governors, this is lodged with them, they fill it with political activists who probably don't need it. So this is just an error. It's just a waste of money. It's politically motivated. Now, but the bigger picture here is the policy audit. Now, if you look at the NBS report, the 105, 103 million, 106 million Nigerians who are poor, out of the 133 million, 106 million are in rural areas. That means that poverty in Nigeria, especially multidimensional poverty, is essentially a rural phenomenon with about, let's say, if you talk in terms of percentages, over a lot. Now, if you look at North-South divide...
That report includes the urban elites too, who have nosedived
that's the 16 million.
Yeah. Poverty is over 40%.
16 million urban, 103. Now, what that tells you, if you look at this, what I look at, sanitation, food security, access to health, they're looking at security shock, they're looking at water, they look at things like school gap, meaning how long you stay before you go to school. Now, why the rural divide is critical is because if you look at state governments that are drivers of the actions that would have reduced this multidimensional poverty, they don't make an investment in those critical issues. Now, let's take, for example, Ondo, Abia, the first three, and the NBS says we can't distinguish between them, they all did well. Now, if you look at the bottom, first 10, everybody is there. Everybody has made investments in infrastructure. Everything we talk about bridges. But everybody falls in the first 6, 7, 8 of the worst performers. Sokoto, Gombe, and so on and so forth. Rivers, that has done a big deal. Every day that's one big mega project being launched.
Commissioned.
Is not in the top 10. So what I tell you, why did Aba, is notorious for
no infrastructure.
But it's number 3.
So what you're saying in essence, if we need to understand you, so that we go alongside you. You're saying it's not about the investment, is the prioritizing of
what
the
are you
funds,
investing
and
in?
what are you investing in if it trickles down to
if you have a bridge,
a
big crossover, and the people access to primary school is still far by distance, and food insecurity is still high, nutrition is still very low, then you are building, that's the point we quarrel with everybody. You say, look, invest more in human development, empowerment, Now, many of them are urban phenomena. People have said that rivers, all those projects are in Port Harcourt area. Now, even if those projects are meaningful to drive economic growth and they do infrastructure, but how about the rural areas where people are living in the most? Look at Bayelsa. Bayelsa has one of the highest per capita cash deposit. Meaning, if you look at the normal poverty rate, Bayelsa is one of the best in Nigeria because the cash glut in Bayelsa per capita is too high. So it obscures the fact that rural Bayelsa has no basic amenities, flooded. People don't have access to anything. So what this triggers is a conversation around two issues. One, policy. What are you using to drive down poverty? Are you just doing projects where there's enough room for contracting?
No, giving them corruption. Money now. They trade that money, 5,000 naira, the social safety net. They distribute 5,000.
Yeah, but that 5,000 is like, what to call crowding out. The investment they will make, maybe they go and take pepper soup that day, extra pepper soup. So that's not the best way to deal with poverty. The way to deal with poverty is provide basic services. If it's school education, provide education that people just walk through. You can also provide healthcare, for example, nutrition. Take, for example, in some countries in the world, where prenatal, postnatal, you provide things like milk, things that you can't easily dispose or not to take. For example, even in America, they do social welfare. They refuse to give cash and they don't give you coupon so that you can use it only for that project.
Sorry, the World Bank even recommended, in retrieving Nigeria's looted funds, in parentheses.
That should be directed in certain areas.
In social intervention nets,
But the point is that a governance crisis, by the time federal government, and this is the problem, federal government...
Why would the World Bank suggest such a thing that it's not workable? Where has it worked in the world?
Uses one size fits all. So the notion of cash transfer makes sense that people need extra cash to go with expenditure. But the point is that when you don't have the basics of access to water, access to sanitation, we're talking about wash, we're talking about sanitation, water, and all those hygiene. If you don't have those basics, transfer of cash will not solve the problem. What will solve the problem is massive government investment in those areas. And that's the World Bank problem. The World Bank is afraid of government in development. They're like market-based. So transfers are like mechanisms that government doesn't get involved. Okay, transfer. Transfer gets to the wrong people, number one. Two, transfers are not enough to create a momentum, a big bang.
Well, Dr. Amadi, at the end of the day, President Muhammadu Buhari did make a promise. He said he wants to lift about 10 million people out of poverty almost before he leaves office.
5 million.
But here we go.
5 million is in, according to the latest World Bank report.
So here we go now. We're seeing more people instead of being moved out, but falling there. 2 out of 3 Nigerians are poor, according to this MBS report. But I like the fact that this report was also presented to the president, and he said something. He says he's unwavered and his commitment is still there to eradicate poverty in the country, adding that the results will be used to influence the allocation of resources going forward, particularly to target sectors where most citizens suffer deprivation. Are you optimistic that we might see some changes in the social net structure as it stands right now, moving forward?
Less than 7 months to go. Where should the opposition come from? Now, this is what the speech writers will put in. In the first place, the government is not structured to mainstream this kind of report. The Ministry of Homeland Security, which point of contact, what's the agents to drive it? Ministry, okay? The bureaucracy is there, oriented towards contracting and procurement. The critical issue is first, deal with the things that Oxfam said. First, deal with allocation in terms of national budget, more to education sector, and then translate to states. Now, you can match grant to performance. So why do you have to give states money when they're not delivering? So UBEC is one example of things we've done well. Okay, so state bring their own, but states are not bringing their own to access. 2 is that maybe we should think in terms of how do we now begin to change the mentality of governance. You see, if you have more electoral value for rural dwellers, meaning electoral system works, and as education, then they can begin to vote in governments whose policies are prioritizing basic assets. Forget these big contracts. Water, food, shelter, employment, rural area, rural cottage industries, schools that are accessible. So every 2 minutes there's a school. Now, the political economy is that if you don't have those voters in the rural area if they don't matter for outcomes in the election, like what Senak is saying, you do an audit and say, what has happened? If you give them, if the election turns out well in 2023, the INEC reforms work, and poor people can actually vote and not be bought over by rich. That's why campaign finance regulation is important. What will happen is that over time, you will now see that the political actors will now mirror what matters and invest in what matters to the people. Right now, what we are seeing is contracts that matter to elites. So big bridges, they look, optics is good, but what we are seeing now is, if we don't want to create a crisis of human development in Nigeria, we have to have a conversation around how to restructure development around social SDGs, and that's really important. And that's why I think that government should not think in terms of what are those basics: is sanitation, access to health, education, school gap, employment at basic level, nutrition. Put these things in the next 3-4 years, you see improvement of both, and those who are top performers will do better, like Abia State that has done very well in spite of no bridges and flyover, and Rivers with bridges have done badly, and of course we don't talk about Sokoto and others. But the point for me is contrast Abia with Rivers, and you see the value of what Bill Gates says: invest in human infrastructure, especially at the basic.
So I think the World Bank investment in Abia State, particularly in area market, is really working.
Maybe it's driving it.
It's driving it.
Maybe you should give credit to OKC, so that probably not building
bridges, but he's investing in the things that affects the lives of the people. I know, for example, they are doing a lot of skilling,
acquisition,
technical vocational education, and that's one of the things that drive employment in rural areas.
You say in the next 2-3 years, but President Buhari promised to take 100 million
Forget
people
the
out
There's
of poverty.
no evidence,
but
no mechanism, no framework to deliver one person.
He's
5
releasing
million,
the money.
5 million, 5.1
social
has gone
investment.
back to poverty. And what Bank is saying, even if we regress control for the so-called pandemic, that Nigeria has net gain on poverty reduction.
Prioritize the people and invest in basics for them, and we'll see more people out of poverty is what the good doc is saying today. Dr. Amadi, thank you so much for joining us tonight on the program.